So welcome again to the second part of this afternoon session. It's really a pleasure to have Giulia Pancheri, Lia, for me. She will talk about Bruno Touschek. Lia is part of the organizing committee of this series of workshops from the very beginning. It was, how long ago, Lia, we started?
I think one of the first was in 2009.
2009, exactly.
Which we did it on the other side of the street in Frascati.
No, the first one was in Florence, 2006 and 7.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yes,
okay,
the first one was in Florence, then in Frascati, then in Perugia, and then in Trento. Then
and now we are
settled down. We settled down in Trento, and we hope to continue this series in presence.
In presence,
in
yes.
presence. Okay, so Lia, thank you very much for giving us this overview on Bruno Touschek life and his extraordinary journey from that race to matter-antimatter colliders. Please.
Thank you, Stefania. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Okay. I thought that it was just proper for a meeting like ours to remember who built the first and proposed and built the first electron-positron collider. And that was Bruno Touschek, especially this year, which is 100 years since his birth. So I will discuss about his major contribution, which is AIDA. He also gave contribution to theoretical physics. They will be part of a different talk. In the meanwhile, now, how did I get to move to the next one? How did I do before? Okay. So Bruno Touschek is the father of electron-positron collisions. And you can see here the blueprint of AIDA with the injection site on the left side here. These were windows to look for the synchrotron radiation emitted by electrons or positrons, and people actually would look at this through these windows. At the bottom here, you see this is the radio frequency to give energy to the to keep the energy stable, the speed stable, and this is the pump to keep the vacuum. Now. I won't need to show this slide to you, but this is the old Livingston plot where AIDA appears. That's why I put it there. And of course, this line which we have here continues on and on and on. We have some of the present plans around here. So again, we don't need to see it. But AIDA was just 400 meters around and 500 MeV center of mass energy. So next slide. The story of Europe's particle colliders actually begins with Touschek and with AIDA, and it's a complex story because it doesn't just start with Bruno Touschek being born in Vienna. It receives contribution from Norway through Rolf Widerøe, and we'll see most part of it, through Germany, Munich, Hamburg, Berlin, and Göttingen, from the United Kingdom, from Glasgow and Edinburgh, in Italy, of course, Rome and Frascati, and then from Orsay, from which then starts the final legacy, beginning of the second generation colliders, which would be Adone, ACO, Spear, VEP2, and then the third generation colliders, LEP, HERA, LHC, with new quarks being discovered, not the bottom at the colliders, but the charm at the top, and the forces, the WZ, the gluon, and the Higgs. So this is really a long story, which is actually a European story. Bruno came from Vienna. He was born in 1921, and his work and life crossed Europe in space and time. He was in Austria and Germany between 21 and 46, in the United Kingdom between 47 and 52, in Italy between 53 and 77. In between, he went to France in Orsay for 2 years, during which it was shown that AIDA was actually a proof of principle. They demonstrated the proof of principle, and then he went to CERN until the last year of his life. In April 1978, he was brought with the CERN car back to Austria, and he died in 25th of May 1978 in Innsbruck, in a private residence near the hospital. The story goes through World War II and the reconstruction of European science up to the discovery, to the beginning of the great particle discoveries in the 1970s. I'll give you a little bit of a background about the material which is available, which is much more than what I can actually even discuss in this talk, or even in the book I'm preparing. This work was partly done with Luisa Bonolis. There was a main archive consultation in the Deutsche Museum in Munich, which concerns the correspondence between Touschek and Arnold Sommerfeld. There is, of course, the consultation of the archives, Touschek and Amaldi archives in Rome. We consulted the University of Glasgow archives to check about Bruno's enrollment and presence in Glasgow. And concerning his correspondence with Max Born, the Church archives of Cambridge University. Finally, the archives of the Max Planck Society for the Bruno Touschek and Bernard Heisberg correspondence. As you can see, he was right in the middle of the great theoretical physics of last century. Major published sources that we have which one can consult, and are available, most of them online, are the legacy of Bruno Touschek, the basic fundamental work by Edoardo Amaldi, which he wrote in the 2 years after Touschek's death. There is the autobiography of Rolf Widerøe, a more recent article we published in the European Physical Journal for History. An most interesting book by Pedro Balosek, who was the biographer of Widerøe, about death rays as lifesavers during World War II, which again is available online and is most interesting to read, as it gives a highlight, a searchlight on what was happening during World War II for many physicists who were of mixed Jewish origin. And then there is a more recent biography by Ashid Surheim, a Norwegian writer and movie maker, about Rolf Widerøe obsessed by a dream. But this is not enough. Well, actually, it could have been enough, but there is some more that we have used with Luisa Bonolis, and I have used also in this talk, which concerns about the Touschek personal life. There are unpublished personal letters to his father, which range from 1939, the ones we have accessed, until 1960, and then there are 2 years later on in 1969 to 71, for reasons which have to do with expert Touschek's wife's death in between, and some of the material was lost. These letters were photographed by me and Luisa Bonolis and give an incredible searchlight on Touschek's personal living through all those years. This is a copy of a letter that was written in 1944, where Touschek sends virtual gifts. This, I think, is from Hamburg. He sends from Berlin, from Hamburg. He sends virtual gifts to his father on the occasion of the New Year and his birthday. But then he shows what is the reality. The letter says dreams and reality. And there are many of these letters, there are about 200. And they also lift a veil, which was partly hidden, well, it's not hidden, but below which there was partly hidden Touschek's experience in the secret classified project for the construction of a Betatron, financed by the Aviation Ministry of the Reich, under the sponsorship, in fact, of General Edgar Milch, who was a field marshal, a close collaborator of Goering. Much was known about this, about Touschek's life, and I'll say a little bit more about it. Bruno grew up in Vienna, and he actually, in a family where the section cultural influences were very strong. Much of his sarcastic wit is comes from Karl Kraus, and much of his ability to draw, or at least the style of drawing, comes from Egon Schiele. He had pictures of Schiele in his room in Vienna, and in one of his letters from Germany in 1943, he asked his father to send him the Schiele who is in his room. So that was the type of family he lived with. And Kokoschka was, in fact, Bruno's drawing teacher as a child. In the family, there were connections with the work of the Wiener Werkstätte. In fact, on the right-hand side, one can see something, a biscuit box, which had been which was a product of one of his mother's sister's husband. Now, the life of Touschek is covered by, at the beginning, is full of losses and sorrows. He was Jewish from his mother's side and Czech transport father. He lost his mother when he was 10 years old, and then his father remarried a few years later. In the meanwhile, also his maternal uncle, Oscar Weltmann, who was a doctor and a painter, died by suicide in 1934. Many Jewish intellectuals committed suicides in those years. They could see the writings on the wall. Then the Anschluss came in 1938, and Bruno Touschek was dismissed from his gymnasium, where he was a brilliant student. We don't really know exactly why, but it says for racial political reasons is what he wrote. It's a long story as to why we don't know why he was dismissed, but certainly, of course, the Anschluss and the change of status of Jewish students played a role in it. Anyway, he got his matura for a Catholic school, and that by itself was, of course, another disruption in his life. At that point, he thought that he should immigrate to England. He tried to immigrate to England, and from Rome, he tried to unsuccessfully to get the visa. He had just turned 18 years old. He could not be part of the Kindertransport, which took many children from Europe to England and then to the United States. So he went back to Vienna and enrolled in the university, but he was expelled from the university in 1941 as a Mischling, as a mixed child, mixed family, parents' child. The other great loss in his life, which comes through his letters, but also through his whole life, is that his maternal grandmother, Josephine Weltmann, was arrested in 1942 and deported to Theresienstadt, where she died in 1943. Now, Bruno often visited Rome when he was a child. After his mother died, he often went to see his aunt Ada, and that, of course, is one of the pans of Bruno's life. Aunt Ada, who lived in the Parioli neighborhood in Rome. And the letter that what you see written in italics is part of a letter that he wrote to his father in March 1939, was hoping to get the visa to emigrate. And but it didn't come. Rather, we don't know if it did not come, because we don't have it from the letter. He never says anything. The fact is that he went back to Vienna, like his grandmother had done. The grandmother was living in Rome with Ada, with her daughter Ada. Then she was scared by the racial anti-Semitic laws by the Italian government, decided to go back to Vienna, and of course, that did not save her. In fact, quite the opposite. In September 1939, Touschek goes back to Vienna, enrolls at the university, but he's not allowed to enroll the year for the next year, which is 41. Then he tries again to be enrolled in December 41. He renews his application, but he's definitely expelled as a Mischling. So what to do? At this point, he has to go somewhere, because his main object is to continue his studies. So he decides he asks for help to Arnold Sommerfeld, who was well known, and to his teacher, Paul Urban, to Bruno's teacher, Paul Urban. So a correspondence, so he goes to see Sommerfeld in Munich, and then he has a correspondence with Sommerfeld, who is taken in by the young man. He was very brilliant. In fact, Touschek had even started making some corrections, had found some small typos in Arnold Sommerfeld's great treatise on atomic physics. And then at that point, a plan develops to leave Vienna, to go to Germany, and start working with, start attending lectures, say in incognito, without anyone knowing that he's Jewish, because of course his last name does not betray him, and earn some living. So he receives advice and names of other professors who have been Sommerfeld students or his colleagues. And so he leaves Vienna for Munich in February 1942. Later in the year, his grandmother will be arrested and deported. In March, he's in Hamburg, where he works in an electronic firm and attends lectures at University of Hamburg. With Paul Hartek, which was a member of Duran Verein, was one of his sponsors. Now, the war years in Germany cover the period from 42 until 45. He was in Hamburg during the first attack on Lübeck and writes to his father about it. In November, but he was unsatisfied with the job he had in Hamburg, which decides, and he needs to move. So in November 42, and here starts this extraordinary journey. The words of the subtitle of my talk are from one of his letters. So in November 42, he leaves Hamburg for Berlin to work at Lebeopta, a Klystron and staff for the German army, and also reviews for a technical journal, which is the Archiv für Elektrotechnik. And this is the crucial point in the story of AIDA. Touschek's reviewing that article. At the bottom, you see the flag tower in Berlin, where for the anti-aerial defense, because he moves to Berlin, and a drawing by Touschek in a letter to his father in November 1943. That during those months in November, this is 1 year later, however, when we're here now, this was during the so-called the Battle of Berlin, which lasted almost a month with very, very heavy bombing, firebombing of the city. Stefania, mi dici quanto ho fatto fino adesso, per piacere? 20 minuti?
Sì, più o meno.
Ok, non ti preoccupare, vado avanti.
No, se vuoi ti avverto quando mancano 10 minuti.
Avvertimi quando manca un quarto d'ora.
Un quarto d'ora, ok.
Ok, grazie. So now, in 1942, when Touschek moved to Berlin, a journey through war, destruction, dreams, but also the road to AIDA started. Because, as I just said, he had left in February Vienna and went to Germany under the protection of Sommerfeld. Not long after, Rolf Widerøe came to Germany to fulfill his dream to build Betatrons. Widerøe would be the person from whom Touschek learned how to build an electron accelerator, and gave a great contribution actually to the construction of Widerøe's machine. And so when Widerøe came to Germany and Touschek was already in Berlin, Bruno joined the project. Let's see how that happened. The road from Norway is very important as what it concerns making accelerators, is one of the crucial roads in European development of particle accelerators. It was Gustav Ising, who invented the linear accelerator concept in 1924. And it was Widerøe who built the first linear accelerator, because Ising had not been able to do it. But Widerøe, in his PhD thesis, built it. Before that, Widerøe had thought of making a Betatron and had written down the Betatron equation, which in fact fixes the relationship between the frequency of the particle in the field and the frequency of the magnetic field strength. On the bottom here, On left, one can see the drawings by Diderot, early drawings of Diderot, how his particle, his induction transformer, his beam transformer, which allowed electrons to move around in circle under the effect of the magnetic field, both to keep them in circle as well as to increase, to give them energy. And on the right-hand side, you can see a pictograph of Diderot, of Rolf Diderot, after the war, when he dedicated all his life to medical uses of the Betatron. Now, Rolf Diderot was born in 1920. He thought of the Betatron and tried to build one when he was in 1922, when he was just 20 years old, but didn't succeed. He, however, wrote down his formula in his thesis. Well, and 20 years later, Donald Kirst built one and built the first Betatron. He even quotes Diderot, even though in the first version of the paper he was wrong here, he has the wrong citation. However, in the Kirst and Trevor paper, Diderot is quoted as the first reference, and he built it. It was a 6 MeV Betatron. How did Diderot heard of it? But how did he hear of it? He was out of the field of research at the time. He was working from Brown Boveri in Norway. So Diderot, he happened to know it because the physical review article with Kirsten Serber, by Kirsten Serber, reached Trondheim, who was a physicist who decided to this most interesting new machine in December 41 at a physics group in Oslo. And Diderot was in the audience because he would follow the field now and then. In fact, told Tangen said, the name quoted is a Norwegian name, but I don't know him. And Diderot said, I am Rolf Diderot. At that point, Diderot understood that someone else had done the machine he wanted to build. So he wrote an article, started preparing an article, which he submitted to the Archiv für Elektrotechnik in Germany. Well, Bruno was, in fact, on the editorial board of the Archiv. He reviews this article about that he mistakenly at the beginning says, he talks about the cyclotron, finds there are errors in this article and discusses with his boss. Now, his boss was in contact with General Milk and the Ministry of Aviation, where in those months, between March and April, the discussion of death ray projects were taking place, both in terms of giant X-rays, of powerful X-rays emitted by giant cathodes, which should be shot at enemy airplanes, but also Betatron was considered or was taken to be a possibility to produce strong X-rays. The whole thing was sort of a fantasy. However, it was a way to keep some physicists working, money to be given by the RLM, and also a way to protect some of the Jewish or half-Jewish physicists working in Germany. And so the project was actually taken, Diderot's project was seriously taken under consideration. German officers went to contact him in Oslo, and within 1 week, Diderot was flown to Berlin to discuss his project. In the meanwhile, Touschek thought that there were lots of errors, and especially there were no relativistic corrections to do. The correspondence took place, and in June 1973, Touschek's objections were included in Diderot's project, who was then approved as a secret project, classified, financed by the Reich Luftwaffe Ministerium. The Betatron was going to be constructed in Hamburg. About that time, Touschek first heard about the colliding beam idea, because Diderot thought about the idea, basically the concept of the center of mass gain in energy, but also thought about which kind of how to do it, and prepared a patent, which he submitted apparently, I mean, official, some date of September 43. It was registered, however, after the war in 1953. I anticipate here something that in 1956, there was an important conference at CERN about accelerators. And there was a discussion, there was O'Neill, there was Kirst, there was a discussion time about colliding beams. And during one of these discussion times, Widerov was again in the audience and jumped up and said, "Oh, I've got a patent." Big discussion. In short, he was first thought that he was a crazy man, and then they recognized him. And of course, but Widerov was not in the accelerator business anymore. Now let's go back to the dark years, Touschek's dark years, or actually everybody's dark years. The whole world. Those were the darkest years of the whole world. There is a letter of Touschek to his father in 1943, in which he writes, "Yesterday, I signed my death warrant. It took us a long time, me and Luisa Bonolis were working on this, to understand that that meant that Touschek had joined officially the Widerov's project." So he was moving now between Berlin and Hamburg, where he was participating to the construction of the Betatron. And in Berlin, he was was working at the Leviopta offices, also working for the German army, and which, since they had been bombed out in their previous location, they were working at the top of one of the anti-aerial flag towers, shown here on the left. And that warrant, it took us a long time, as I said, with Luisa, to understand why and what it meant, that warrant, but that's exactly what it was. During this time, from 1944, Touschek was free to visit his family in Vienna, while Widerov often went to Norway. They were part of an important project. However, it was an important secret project of war interest, and like other projects throughout Germany, it employed also many mixed Jewish scientists. And of course, the Gestapo knew it, but they were useful to keep them in the system. At the same time, there were many German scientists who wanted to keep their friends, mostly wanted to save their friends. So the Betatron project was one of them. Another Betatron project was similarly done by another German group. What is, however, of interest now and collects to the death warrant, something that nobody actually has ever found out, we finally understood by reading the letters, that Touschek was summoned by the famous Todt organization, which was the organization which organized all of the forced labor under the minister Albert Speer. All of the forced labor of the workers from Europe, which were brought to the forced labor camps, and then, when their usefulness were over, would be sent out to concentration camp. Now, in fact, this is Touschek escaped the Todt organization 3 times until March 15, 1945, when he was arrested. The Betatron work was over, and it was safely placed away near Hamburg, and he was arrested. He was in the Fuhlsbüttel prison that you see on the right, on the central photograph, a picture, and he was, on April 15, the light were approaching Hamburg, and all the prisoners in the prison were in groups of 200, started on a forced march to kill the concentration camp. Touschek was one of them. This is a drawing from a book which shows this type of forced march. The crosses indicate people who passed away during the march. Touschek also was shot. He was shot after collapsing and then was left as dead. However, then he woke up. I mean, it didn't really happen. He only lost consciousness. He was put to hospital in Altona prison and was freed on April 30, 1945. This is one of the things which are part of Touschek's legend, and we now understand the whole connection, why he was arrested and what happened to him on that particular day. Now, after the war, he was now under the protection of the Allied forces, in particular of the Allied, of the so-called T-Force, which was looking for German science and equipment, and whose mission was to reconstruct German science on peaceful grounds. And the place where to start it was the University of Göttingen, where Touschek went to get his diploma in physics. As he arrived in Göttingen actually in April 1946, what he saw first thing were three teachers that he had already met in Berlin: Werner Heisenberg, Max von Laue, and Otto Hahn. He had attended von Laue's lectures, and he had met many times Heisenberg during the Betatron work in Berlin. So he did his diploma in physics, had a 6 months assistantship with Werner Heisenberg, but the T-Force wanted him to go to Glasgow because the UK were developing many programs in accelerators, and in particular we'll see now about the University of Glasgow. And because of that, his destiny was not to stay in Germany. He had actually to go and participate and help the UK effort. There weren't that many accelerator physicists of his level and his age and his intelligence and his experience in Germany at the time. So there he went to Glasgow, where the post-war reconstruction included the building of a synchrotron in Glasgow, 300 then became 500 MeV synchrotron. The UK government in 1946 was building new accelerators in Birmingham, Cambridge, Liverpool, Oxford, and Glasgow. So I just said that the T-Force was interested in Bruno. The Glasgow year, during these years, was the making of Bruno as a theoretical physicist. He was admitted to the University of Glasgow as a research student. And these are just some little things I picked up from the archives about the student handbook relative to the year 1946-1947, when he joined the Glasgow. At center, you will see Philip D, who was the chair of the physics of the natural philosophy department, or rather the physics department, together with Pauli in 1948. And the building at the right-hand side was where Touschek lived on the top floor in Philip D house for a couple of years. That was a house which had been built for Lord Kelvin, and then was occupied by the professor of natural philosophy of the University of Glasgow until 55. From the UK, in the UK, Touschek both followed all the research on all the synchrotrons which were being built in all the machines which were being built in the UK, but also got his thesis on theoretical physics. We see below here his external advisor, who was Rudolf Peyers, in the company of Wolfgang Pauli and Paul Dirac in a conference in Birmingham, which certainly Touschek attended, because in Birmingham there was also the construction of an accelerator. And now you see the beginning of the construction of these European machines. You can see down here Vienna and the contribution from Oslo, the German part, and right now the part which comes from the UK, his theoretical physics formation. The Glasgow days had many beautiful days for Touschek. He could relax, he was out of danger, he could do his physics in a controlled surrounding, not having to scramble between classes. And he went to see, and one of his colleagues introduced him to Max Born, who after many various circumstances was now Tide Professor of Physics in the University of Edinburgh, and he would go and work with Max Born. They exchanged many letters, and Born asked him to contribute the appendix on meson physics and beta decays, and that was he's not quoted in the future versions, but in this volume he's thanked. At the time, during those years, he also worked, he exchanged a long correspondence with Max Born about physics, about lots of things. And also he wrote one of his important papers, which is a work with Walter Thirring about the infrared catastrophe, which will come later to him, but through all of his radiative corrections works. But things changed after the Fuchs affair. You see here Klaus Fuchs's photograph. I think it was taken probably when he was arrested. That happened in January 1950, soon after Touschek had gotten his PhD, his degree. And the Fuchs affair made life very difficult for all foreign-born scientists, including Rudolf Peierls, who had participated as the first protagonist to the Manhattan Project. But Peierls, at a certain point, was even denied his clearance. So things changed, and Bruno also found he could not really fit with the British system. So he tried to leave. He visited Copenhagen, invited by Niels Bohr, whom he had met during a conference in Edinburgh. He applied for a position in Oxford, but for a complicated set of circumstances, he received no answer and regretted not having stayed in Germany. Personally, I think he had no choice, so he had to leave anyway. T-Force, the British wanted him. So in 1952, Touschek came in contact with Bruno Ferretti from the University of Rome, who had worked with Peierls in Birmingham in a few years before on radiation damping, on radiation effects. In this photograph, you see Bruno Ferretti, Homi Bhabha, and Wolfgang Pauli sorry, this is not 58, it's in 1948. I made a typo. So now he's ready to leave. Ferretti offers him a position in Rome together with Edoardo Amaldi. But the Glasgow period gave Bruno the pause he needed to recover from the tragedies of the past. In a setting of university life, learning from his peers, having lots of fun going out to do harvest in the north. He swam in all the rocks around Glasgow, and he could now go back, however, to Europe, where the future creative life would develop. How Touschek went from Glasgow to Rome? Because Edoardo Amaldi and Bruno Ferretti are the two who brought Touschek from Enrico. They both belong to Fermi's group, and they brought Touschek from Glasgow to the University of Rome in 1953. This fitted in Amaldi's plan for the post-war scientific reconstruction, the creation of CERN, Italy becoming a full-fledged member of the accelerators club, and the development of Rome particle physics group. You see also Giorgio Salvini in the photograph at left. He was going to be the future the director of the future laboratory where AIDA was going to be built, and before AIDA, the synchrotron. The creation of CERN was part of Amaldi's plan, and in that plan there was also the creation of national laboratories. One of them was in fact Orsay in France, and the other was Frascati in Italy, in order to have a feeding ground for the scientists who would go to work at CERN. From Glasgow to Rome, at the left you see one of Touschek's drawings, last Touschek drawings from Glasgow. At the right we see Touschek with Amaldi at his right, Amaldi and Ginestra Amaldi, and other visitors which I have not identified, but if someone can identify them, that would be great. And this is Tusculum Hills, where Edoardo Amaldi was eyeing the place for the future laboratory without actually committing himself yet. So when Bruno joined the institute in 1953, he writes to his father that he loves the place, the food, the wine, the countryside, and the ambience, and the people in the institute. It's a very lively place. It's at the center of the European recovery, and obviously could not, coming from the dreary, dark, cold Glasgow, and also complacent Glasgow. He's now in a city, in a country. in a continent which is ready for reconstruction, especially the countries who had lost the war. Now, in Rome, Touschek's unique formation as theorist and accelerator physicist found the perfect synthesis. His theoretical physics formation has started with the Vienna School, the great mathematical school of Vienna University. One of his teachers had been Hans Stirling. And then the great German school, Sommerfeld, Wien, Heisenberg, Max Born, Wolfgang Pauli, they're all there in his life. He wrote and collaborated not in papers, but in intellectual exchanges with all four of them. And Pauli actually became his mentor during the years in Rome, his intellectual mentor. The other synthesis came from how to build an accelerator from scratch, from nothing. That's what, in fact, under bombing and destruction, which is exactly what he had done with Widerøe. Now, in fact, that's the theoretical physics formation was not enough to make AIDA. He also found a laboratory, and even his experience with the Widerøe would not have been enough. But he also found a laboratory on the making to host a screen synchrotron near Rome, which meant instrumentation, a place, the people, the scientists, the technicians, all what makes a modern accelerator. Not just something like Lawrence, you could do it in his small laboratory in Berkeley. You needed something else. We were on the march towards high energy physics, and one needed space, people, technicians, everybody. So in January, the INFN decided to start building its accelerator, not yet knowing the type, but then it came out, it was an electron synchrotron in the summer. And in 1954, the place was agreed to be Frascati near Rome. Amaldi kept quiet for a while, and then the place was decided to be near Rome. So in 1957, a national laboratory was operational, and the synchrotron parts began to be assembled. The realization of Enrico Fermi Solbrin before leaving Italy for the US in 1938 was fulfilled. Now, building the synchrotron gave Italian science and technology a quantum jump towards modern physics and the entrance to the club of countries who could build particle accelerators. It was comparable with other accelerators in the world, not really frontier physics, because it was based on the weak focusing principle, a little bit simpler than the strong focusing principle of the higher other machines, but still it was a 1000 MeV electron synchrotron. In 1954, the team, we show here when the team of scientists and technicians leaves Pisa, where the parts had been assembled before, while the laboratory was being built. So there are a couple of trucks, and then they all get onto the truck. Before starting, they go to the truck, and then they go. And the work to assemble the synchrotron in Frascati started. What was happening in parallel, what concerns our story? The theorists worked out symmetries. That between 1950 and 57, the CPT theorem became part of everybody's, every theorist formation. Parity non-conservation was discovered in 1956. Antiprotons, antimatter became a household word. There are even poems in the New Yorker about anti-Teller meeting Teller, and then there were only gamma rays in 1956. It was really 57. It was really something that became caught public's imagination. In that time, Touschek was working on neutrinos and chiral symmetry. Some of his best theoretical physics papers come from those years. At the same time, so this the theorists and the symmetrists we are talking about the Rochester Conference of New York in 1956, and Yang and Lee paper appears in I think December 56, if not January, in December. The ideas in Biocollides, in the meanwhile, were vented at other conferences. 1956 is a crucial watershed year for particle physics. In September or July, in the summer, in Geneva, O'Neill proposes the colliding beam idea, the two tangent rings, and also Kersh proposes the similar idea with two different accelerators. Then the thing proceeds.
Yeah. 15 minutes.
1:05?
15.
Okay,
yes,
good.
1:05.
Yeah, 1:05. Okay, so now let's look at the making of AIDA, because we are getting there. Let's start from 1958. In December, Wolfgang Pauli dies, and Bruno loses his major theoretical physics companion. He writes to his father that he doesn't know anymore with whom he can talk physics. He's alone now. He has to start by himself. All his mentors are gone. Now he starts his life, his road towards AIDA. In April, the Frascati synchrotron is working. It's there, ready, can be used. In July, he goes to the Kiev conference, where projects for electron-electron colliders were presented, and of course he was attending, and the Hofstadter experiment is also presented. Now just turn around those two graphs that we have here, and which in Touschek's mind, who loved symmetries, who loved puns, it's just a pun to go from here to this one down here. How did it actually happen? Of course, he had this information, he has his culture and everything else. But after the Kiev conference, Panofsky, who was in Europe, and also went to a conference in the fall in Geneva, then went to Rome and gave a talk. We have a date of a seminar by Panofsky, 26th of October 1959, where Touschek launches, I'm sorry, I should have put an A, sorry for the typo, for electron-positron collisions as tools for new physics discoveries. We're talking of October 59. All the theorists in Rome are placed to get and try to work on this. Cabibbo and Gatto start writing a paper, which will be published, in fact, in March. During all these months, Touschek thinks and tries to understand what to do and tries to see if it can be done. Finally, on February 17, 1960, in February, he proposes to the Frascati laboratory to build an electron-positron collider, and the laboratory accepts to do it. It had occurred to Bruno that if electrons circle clockwise, the antiparticle will circle anti-clockwise. If one can make them clash, they will annihilate. At the end, all the energy will be available. Everything which he had heard and learned and remembered comes to his mind. And then what he says to the physicists assembled in Frascati in February is, this would be an experiment worth making. The challenge, of course, consisted in having a machine in which particles which do not naturally live in the world would be kept and conserved. And he believed it could be done. In fact, he kept on saying the CPT theorem will make it. In fact, he would add, CP is enough. So the idea of annihilation matter, antimatter, had been brooding in his mind for quite a long time. Why? Because he could explore the quantum vacuum created in the annihilation. And that's the big difference in what the Americans were doing, which were trying to look for breakdown of electrodynamics for electron-electron collisions, and also what the Russians had started, even though the Russians also started thinking about electron-positron around 59. That's another story. What could one learn from it? And and the answer was, what is beyond of the world of stable particles? How to do it, and could it be done? So he started calculating on 18th of the day after he started calculating, and he abandons theoretical physics, of which he is sick and wants to change. And his mentor has died, and he'll pick it up later by creating a theoretical physics group in Frascati. But right now, he wants to know how to make this machine work. So he proposes to study Racimines into pions, muons, kaons, and to gammas, and to ask Gatto what can be learned from this measurement. This is in February. And then AIDA is approved, fully approved in March by the laboratory, with money searched for, and a specific program and a specific timeline. AIDA represents a perfect synthesis between state-of-the-art accelerator physics. This was O'Neill's project in the Touschek's drawing, and this is actually the AIDA itself, again in Touschek's drawing. We have the perfect synthesis between new ideas in theoretical and experimental particle physics, QED, symmetry, CPT theorem, antiparticles created in the laboratory, and then technology available through synchrotron and linear accelerator. Because what's the point? That after AIDA was approved, and you see it here little next to the synchrotron, which acted as injector for AIDA, injecting a gamma ray produced in the synchrotron, sent to AIDA, and in AIDA splitting into an electron-positron pair. So it's approved. In November, Touschek understands that it's going to work and proposes to build Adone. And in February, we have the first build in AIDA. But a problem occurred. Electron and positron beams were too feeble for the probability of collisions to be observed. So now we have the next step. This is just a citation which I'll skip, just to say that he knew already in November that AIDA was waiting for him, but that from the reports of my spies, I learned that we are really the first in this area. The American competition won't bother us for a year. But the injection was too poor. They did not have enough collisions. They did not have enough electrons and positrons to make the probability of collisions observable. And this comes now the other country which will help in the making of AIDA, and this is France. Because in 1961, in July 1961, there was a visit to Frascati where intriguing things were reported to be happening. Pierre Marin from Bourset and Georges Charpak from CERN went to Frascati. They decided, together with Touschek and Bernardini, that the linear collider in Orsay, which had been built in parallel to the synchrotron by the French, by scientists from the ENS, the linear accelerator could provide a powerful injector, and that is exactly what it was. AIDA went to Orsay, and in 1964, collisions were observed through a process of photon Bremsstrahlung, which had been calculated, by the way, by two students from the University of Rome, Franco Buccella and Guido Altarelli. The theoretical calculation for the process, which allowed to prove that AIDA worked, was the thesis work of Altarelli and Buccella with Raoul Gatto. The road to particle colliders, I'm sorry for another little typo. So in February 1960, BT proposes to build an electron, to build AIDA in February. In November, he proposes Adone. In 63, discovers the Touschek effect, after AIDA had been transported to Orsay. In 64, collisions are proved to have taken place. Then in 64, Adone starts. No, in 64, the building of Adone starts. And Adone started in 1969, where this multi-hadron production was discovered. It was unfortunately a bit too late. Many things happened to delay the start of Adone. But we see here Adone, ACO, Spear, Doris, all the other machines coming up. So AIDA and Adone, now we can see them as a European story. This is AIDA in Frascati on top left. Below we see the Adone, an overview of the present Frascati site. On the right-hand side here, there is the old site where AIDA was built. The Adone building, which actually where Adone was built and now houses the Adeno accelerator Daphne. And here you see the contribution of all European countries, which made the thing possible. Austria, Norway, Germany, UK, France. New state of matters appeared after 1969 in electron-positron collision. The multi-hadron production was discovered first in Frascati by Adone in 1969. Touschek was elated when it came out. That was exactly, he understood immediately that something new was happening, and that something was coming up which had not been seen before. Well, it had been seen in deep inelastic scattering, but this was a different machine. It was a machine which could distinguish the background for new things. It was the proof that actually we are on the road to higher discoveries. But Frascati missed the gypsy, and that's, of course, is a complicated and sad story. However, in 1974, a particle which actually was understood what it was rather soon, at least by the American scientists, but also by many others, the discovery of a new state of matter made of new type of charms was discovered in Brookhaven, at Spear, and confirmed in Frascati. So we all know the story of the gypsy. So the question that one could ask, although this is true for lots of other scientists. In 1976, Burton Victor and Sam Ting award the Nobel Prize for what is this is a quotation from the award. Pioneering work in the discovery of a heavy elementary particle of a new kind, the gypsy. But why did the Nobel Committee recognize the pioneering contribution that Touschek had given to particle physics in the 1976 discovery? Let's not forget that Frascati missed the gypsy only because initially it had been fixed to be just slightly less than the energy of the gypsy. So and then after 2 days of search, it was found also in Frascati. It confirmed the other discoveries. The 3 articles were all published in the same issue of the Physical Review, Letters, in December, one after the other, first Ting, second Richter, third Frascati, but he was missed. And the official, in all the official papers of the 1976 Nobel Prize, there is no mention of Touschek. There is a mention of Frascati in Ting's talk, but no mention of Touschek. Well, one can ask many questions, perhaps because he was an outsider, or because he died too young. Whatever is the reason, he in fact died pretty soon after the 96. 2 years after Richter and Ting were given the Nobel Prize. He had problems of health. He had, as we all know, a very serious problem of drinking, which probably was born out of his the first terrible years of his life, and compounded by staying in Glasgow for 5 years, where it's well known that there is a very strong, the drinking problem is very strong. It has always been very strong in Glasgow. However, we don't really know. Perhaps he was nominated and then he was not supported. We don't know it. We'll find out in a few years, because one needs a certain number of years since the last nomination, 75 years. Then one can access the Nobel archives. So I think I'm over. Thanks to my collaborator Luisa Bonolis from the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, who has contributed and worked with me for many years, since 2000, almost 20 years that she has been working, and I have also been. My close collaborator and friend Orlando Ciaffoni, a technician from the laboratory, who has given lots of help throughout. Orlando Ciaffoni, Jacques Heisinski, whose thesis test d'état is the major record, the only existing complete record of AIDA's construction. He was part of the team, in fact. I have to thank my son, who helped me translating all the 200 letters of Touschek are in German. So he transcribed and translated them, and I extracted some material from these 200 letters. My husband, of course, that goes by default, let's put it this way. Galileo Violini, an old friend who has been reading the 460 pages of the book I'm writing and checking all my mistakes. And of course, right now, last 2 months, he came up and said, oh, why? I'll read it. And then day after day, he was just sending me thousands of corrections. I got the scores. I thought I'll never finish it. Anyway, I'm on the way. And many more friends and colleagues. And to come, there's going to be a symposium in Rome and Frascati on December 2, 3, 4. We don't know if it will be in presence, or we hope it will be in presence, and a book in progress. I hope I made the time. Stefania, I never stopped, but I can go back.
Sorry, I'm muted. You did it perfectly in time. Congratulations.
Yeah, you're right. Wow, at my age, yeah. time is precious. Okay.
Exactly. Thank you, Leah. Thank you very much.
Let me just repeat one thing.
Sure.
That the theoretical physics contribution by Touschek is not discussed in this talk, but he created the theoretical physics group in Frascati. I mean, the names of people who have been members of the Frascati group range from Sergio Ferrara, Giorgio Parisi, and before Mario Greco, Giancarlo Rossi. I mean, you name them, Paolo Di Vecchia, all of them. Some of them were hired directly by Touschek, others were his students. And then there was a very strong group, which actually went on until not long time. Now it's a little small, the group, but it's not the group's fault. And the group is represented by this meeting. We have Gennaro.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, sorry, that's obvious.
No. Thank you. Really, thanks, Leah. It was a pleasure to. I already had a look at the film, but I appreciated very much to see some documents in your talk, and I will. It will be a pleasure to have your book too when it will be finished. Other questions for Leah, or I don't know, comments, or they are too young?
No, mostly there is so much stuff.
No, it's an impressive life. I mean, it's incredible.
It's an impressive life.
You told us today, yes.
Yeah,
in fact, I didn't
really
know.
Looking forward for the book. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I didn't know
yeah.
the first part of the Bruno Touschek life. I didn't know all these details, and it is really impressive. Really impressive.
Yeah, that is actually. Oh, let me show you some drawings that he made when he was in northern Scotland. I don't know how to go back to the previous one with this. Okay, let me go to the first part is terrible. And now if you look at it, you now understand how he, not only he survived, he just created something out of, here it is. He kept on, he had continuously to restart again, you know?
Yes.
The death of his mother was, of course, a major, and then the destruction. See, he's really part of how the Vienna Jews were basically, that society basically was destroyed, unfortunately. It spread around the world, of course, it not destroyed.
Yeah.
Then
we have a question, Roberto 2.
Yeah. Yes, I think I learned a few things, although I have heard the story of Touschek already a few times, being from Rome. And every time it strikes me how, you know, I think his life, but probably the people that age were in these years were much more adventurous than ours. You know, I think in a way he's probably, you know, forges people to be more brave, and even in physics, what I mean, take the life aside. So it's nice to see that they were trying things, they were failing. Maybe they were failing fast enough that they can try something else just after failing the first thing. And maybe today this is no longer possible because everything takes a very long time. For, you know, practical reasons and for sometimes political reasons, as we heard this morning. So I don't know if it's a real question, but I wanted to hear you what you think about what you see from, you know, Touschek's generation until now. Have we, you know, renounced to try things, and we always go for the beaten path? You see that we may need to try harder and maybe fail more. What's your impression about this? I think there is a very striking contrast between
what this
generation did and what our generation plans from now to 2090, where we just build the same collider we already built a little bit bigger.
You see, the only thing we can make similar to what was happening in those years is actually COVID. In other words, Touschek's life went through one of the worst periods of European life, modern times. There were 2 wars, the Nazi and the fascist regime, and so on and so forth. We know it. And so Touschek survived. To survive, you had to do that. You know, now I think that the COVID is in a very smaller scale, like between AIDA and the LHC. It's something similar. In other words, it's a change in our life and habits that it has to be also in education. You know, the students who only have learning at distance is not the same thing. That's we have now to start and try to understand how to survive, how to go further. And what we have. That's my feeling. Our meeting today, example, has only 13 people. Normally we have what, 40 or 50, right? That's the number we have. Why? Because we are using all the old means for something which used to, because after all, Zoom is new, but it's still not. We have to understand, perhaps what we can see in Europe, at least, the rest of the world, of course, is there are lots of people who can be more lively and more inventive than we are, because they have to survive through much worse duress than we have. But for Europe, perhaps we could look at COVID as a way to, as a dividing line where courage and invention can come up again. That's my. But of course, don't forget the so-called countries under development. There is still life and death to fight, and maybe something will come up from there.
I see. Thank you.
No other comment? No? Anyways, it's very, very, very impressive. I don't know if COVID will be a line of change,
separation,
of separation. Yeah. I don't know. Actually, we are still waiting for, you know, for understanding something.
Yes.
Anyway, you're right. We have to go on. We have to survive. I agree with you.
You see, Stefania, the fact that the vaccine could be developed in incredibly and distributed and administered in incredibly short time is something that 2 years ago, everyone would say, oh, it will take 5 years. No, it took less than 1 year. Mm-hmm. And this we know also how it happened. I mean, we don't have to sell it between us. We know that all the great, but this is already an enormous change, if not, maybe not in our field. But something was done, and because there was a life and death threat. Mm-hmm. So COVID has played a certain role. And let's see.
Let's see.
Anyway, Touschek's life is an example of how an exceptional mind will survive, helped by lots of other people, of course.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for listening and giving me this opportunity.
No, thanks to you. It was really interesting.